Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different hot seat coaches out there and how there's going to be a couple that end up getting the can at the end of the year, and it'll be interesting to see what the openings are. There are some big ones in the SEC that could be opening, but let's jump into Texas and let's talk about how is this the biggest year in Texas football history? And I know that sounds crazy when I say it, and I felt crazy when I was writing it yesterday, but I don't necessarily think it's incorrect. I think there's so much going into this year, and Texas has a chance to do something this year that they haven't done since 2009, which is essentially stamp themselves as one of the best programs in the stamp themselves as one of the best programs in the country. There's been this sentiment that I've seen around Texas recruiting lately as they've kind of gone through a little bit of a tough patch where it was CJ Vogel talking about this over at On Texas Football. Just fantastic. If you are a Texas fan, definitely go subscribe over there. But he was talking about Texas recruiting, and he was talking about how Texas is viewed among recruits right now in high school, and they weren't around really, or at least weren't really paying attention when Texas was really relevant the last time, back in 2009, 2005, when they were just dominating people. They don't really remember that. They remember the decade that is known as the dark decade for Texas football fans, and that has played a huge part in their recruiting efforts the last couple of years. They've been doing a great job. They obviously, Steve Sarkisian and company have built up some really, really remarkable classes the last couple of years, but they've run into some trouble for a very simple reason, which is essentially just the recruits don't know what Texas is yet. And they know that last year was incredible. They know that a lot of momentum is heading in the right direction. They know that there is a ton of things to really like about this team. They also know that there are a ton of things to like about a lot of the teams that Texas has had over the past couple of years and over the past decade. So it's hard for them to say, we saw what you did last year and it was really impressive, but I'm going to need to see it again and maybe one more time before I feel fully confident in you being a program that is not just here for a couple of years, but is here for a very long time. So all of this goes into this season. It's going to be huge for Texas for just infinite amount of reasons. Steve Sarkisian could, totally leave everything in his past and be one of the premier coaches in this country at the end of the year. And the good news is for Texas fans, there's a lot of things moving in the right direction. Just about everything is moving in the right direction for Texas. I mean, you have the quarterback coming back in Quinn Ewers that is just out of this world. There's no two ways about that. I don't think anyone's questioning that, frankly. But there's so much more that goes into it, obviously. There's obviously tons of people, deeper on the depth chart. You have obviously Arch Manning right behind him. That makes them feel very good about their situation. But Steve Sarkisian has built up a group of players that is just ridiculous, to be totally honest with you. I would have them either the third or the fourth best roster in the country, depending on where you put them against Oregon. And I think when you look at just across the board, the skill players are just ridiculous. Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter is one of the best duos in the country. The wide receiver portal position, when you add guys like Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden, the worry of them not being as good is way lessened because they're very much seasoned veterans. The O-line is one of the best in the country, led by one of the best offensive tackles in the country, by Kelvin Banks, a very, very talented guy, likely a top 10 pick in 2025's draft. The D-line could be stronger, but definitely got stronger throughout the portal. You have Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton, who will likely be the starters there, but then you brought in a guy like Bill Norton, who's going to be absolutely huge. You stole Jermaine Lole from Oklahoma late on in the process, which was massive for this team. So a lot of really good things they did in the portal there. The linebacking duo, I think, is really awesome and one of the more underrated parts of this team. Anthony Hill and David Benda, I think, are going to be a fantastic duo, and I think Anthony Hill might be a guy that can develop into an all-SEC type player. Maybe not this year, but throughout his time at Texas, he's just going to be incredible. And then his DB group is really solid. Obviously, this was a worry last year, but what they did over the offseason was huge, which was they just got a lot of veteran talent. They got a lot of guys that know exactly where to be, know exactly how to, play coverages, exactly how to go through film study, which is a huge part of that. And they're just going to be smarter. They're not necessarily, they didn't take any massive leaps necessarily in the overall talent of the group. I don't necessarily think it changed, to the nth degree or anything like that, but I do think they have all of the guys that they need to have. I think Jahdae Barron is the most important guy because he might just play nickel, corner, and safety at different points during this season. Andrew Makuba is huge coming in from Clemson, a very smart, experienced guy. Michael Taff on the other side is going to be huge. Derek Williams, another fantastic safety that absolutely can play some really good football. They just have a lot going for them. And then I think Manny Muhammad, Gavin Holmes, Javion Cole are going to be huge for the corners. Those are likely the guys. And then Jelani McDonald's another one to watch back there. But overall, the roster is just ridiculous. I think everyone understands that when they look at Texas at this point. It's led by Quinn Ewers and that quarterback room. But overall, there's really nothing out of place. And then you look at the staff. It's elite top to bottom. It's pretty much the same as the roster. I mean, you look at what Steve Sarkisian has done the last couple of years, asserted himself at least towards the top of the head coaches in the country. Kyle Flood is a fantastic offensive line developer and also serves as offensive coordinator. Pete Kwiatkowski is the DC that everyone does have some mixed opinions on, to be totally fair. But at the end of the day, every year that he's been there, the defense has improved. They've gotten better. The talent has gotten better, but also just the scheme has gotten a lot better every single year. And then the impressive thing, more than anything else, with Steve Sarkisian, with this staff, is how he's replaced some of the openings that have formed. Bo Davis left for LSU. He filled it with Kenny Baker. And that one, the jury's still out on Kenny Baker a little bit because of some of the recruiting troubles, but always going to be an issue with an NFL coach coming down. And if you can develop the guys this year and play some really good football on that D-line, it's not going to be a problem. I can almost promise you that. Jeff Choate also left this offseason to become the head coach at Nevada. He brought in Johnny Nansen, who was a DC at Arizona a year ago. So all the craziness that happened over at Tucson definitely favored Texas a little bit. And this is a fantastic recruiter with really good roots out in Utah, really good roots over a little bit more west. Just does a fantastic job on the recruiting trail. And then other moves before this year. You have Brennan Marion. They brought in Chris Jackson from the NFL level, and he's done a fantastic job his first couple of years. Stan Drayton took the job as a head coach over at Temple. They brought in Tashard Choice, who I would argue is the best running back coach in the country. So a lot going right in the staff over there in Austin. And the guy up top, Steve Sarkisian, that's making all of these decisions, that's pulling all of these levers, is pulling him at the perfect moment and doing just incredible jobs of it. And then finally, something that we talked about yesterday with Oregon that fully applies to Texas as well is the alignment that at Texas. It's remarkable how many people at Texas are finally pulling in the same direction. I think a lot of people remember how crazy the time was there for quite some time because that wasn't the case. Whether it was the boosters or the AD or the president or whoever it was, someone was pulling against the head coach. Someone was pulling against this program or just not necessarily as gung-ho on the coach to put that amount of money into the program. No longer the case. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Chris Del Conte, the AD right there, with Steve Sarkisian, the boosters, which are really the domino and the one that make everyone around Texas just a little bit nervous every year. But at the end of the day, Steve Sarkisian walked in, knew that this was going to be a tough job to handle because of all the outside noise and because of all the people that have their hands in what you're doing, and he's handled it beautifully. He's done an incredible job of taking what is a really daunting job in a lot of different ways and just taking off from pretty much the get-go. So I think this has been a huge, huge year and a huge thing for him, which he walked into a situation that over the past, decade was really sketchy. But Chris Del Conte, the AD, deserves all the credit in the world because he got everyone on the same page. He made sure everyone was pulling in the same direction, and it's led to a really, really incredible run for Texas football, but it's got to continue. And that's the biggest thing about this year and why I think it's such a big year for Texas football is you're walking into a monster. There's no two ways about that. And Texas knows that. Steve Sarkisian knows that. Brent Venables knows that about Oklahoma as well. But at the end of the day, you're walking into the monster that is the SEC. I know there are a lot of Texas fans that frankly are wrong and say that the physicality won't be a problem, that they'll be able to handle it. And Texas is well more equipped than most schools in the country to handle the SEC schedule grind. But you never know until you get in it. You never know how tough that game is coming back from Starkville or coming back from Vandy or coming back from one of the South Carolina playing a game there. Your body hurts just a little bit more, and it's just a little bit tougher to get up the next day and go to workouts and do everything you need to do, and that's a thing that you only learn from being in it. Now, it's not to say that that they can't handle it. They absolutely can. They have tons of physical guys. The amount of guys they have on the offensive line that are over 300 pounds is just ridiculous. But overall, this is a huge year for them in 10 different ways. Steve Sarkisian can stamp himself as one of the premier coaches in this sport. Texas can get back to the top and not just say, we're here for a year, but we're sticking around for quite some time, regardless of the conference that we're in. They can prove everyone that says they can't handle the SEC totally wrong and run through it and maybe win 10, 11 games, go to the title game. And if they win it, then everything gets really interesting in Austin, because we talked about it with Oregon, where they just needed a spark plug. They just needed that 1 year. And obviously last year was huge for Texas to get them back into that conversation at least. But it's usually the year after the year for a lot of these programs that defines you. It's usually the one right after you've had that massive success, you've broken through, you've done all the things that you wanted to do, then you have to prove that you're going to do it year over year. And so I think 2024 is one of those years that Texas football is back in the conversation. There's no two ways about that. They're one of the big-time teams going into this year, but you got to deliver this year. And if you don't deliver this year, then recruiting will pretty much stay where it is right now, because the recruits will see what they expected to see. There are a lot of guys that are skeptical of what Texas is going to be over the next couple of years. If you confirm that in their minds, they're going to find other places to play. So it's not to say that if Texas doesn't have a great 2024, they're in trouble or they're down the drain by any means. But it is to say this is a fantastic opportunity for Texas to take everything back, to be the premier team in college football, to win a national title, to recruit at an incredibly high level, and maybe, just maybe, leave a lot of teams in the dust. So it could be a huge year for so many people in that program, but overall, Texas football could be looking back on 2024 as one of the most defining years in their history at the end of it. So it'll be fascinating to watch that, but we're going to take our second break. And when we come back, we're going to get right back into talking points around the Big Ten. Wanted to break down one last Big Ten segment here, so we'll do that right after this, so stick with us.